The tiny sweater was robin's egg blue, hand-knitted with uneven stitches that bunched at the sleeves, and it stretched across the chest of the largest wolf in the Northern Territories like a crop top on a linebacker. Kyle Ashbourne, Alpha King of the Black Ridge Pack, stood frozen at the tree line, watching his feral wolf form reflected in the glass of her cottage window. His beta, Roman, crouched beside him in the underbrush, one hand clamped over his own mouth to muffle what was clearly a laugh disguised as a cough. The wolf in the reflection wore the sweater proudly, ears forward, tail high, chest puffed out so the yarn stretched to its absolute limit, one good breath away from popping every stitch. And inside that wolf, 5 minutes ago, had been Kyle himself. He had intended to stay one night. He had been wrong. 3 weeks earlier, Elara Voss had found what she believed was a starving juvenile wolf collapsed beside her rain barrel. She worked the graveyard shift at the Black Ridge Pack's seed archive, a temperature-controlled vault buried beneath the Western Mountain, where she catalogued and preserved the genetic heritage of crops that no longer grew wild. It was solitary work, underground work, the kind of job they gave to an Omega with no family ties and no political value, someone they could forget existed between quarterly inventory reports. She lived alone in a stone cottage at the edge of pack territory, where the maintained roads dissolved into goat trails, and the nearest neighbor was a 40-minute walk through birch forest. The cottage smelled of lanolin and dried rosemary, and the particular mustiness of old wool, because Elara knitted compulsively. Scarves for no one. Blankets for the shelter cats in town. Mittens she left on the community board at the archive entrance, never claimed. The night she found the wolf, she had just come home from a 12-hour shift, her fingers still numb from the cold vault, her canvas bag heavy with a jar of soup she had heated on the break-room burner. The wolf lay on its side in the mud, ribs visible, one forepaw bent at an angle that made her wince. Its fur was black as wet slate, matted with burrs and what looked like dried blood along its flank. She knelt in the rain, spoke softly, touched its nose with 2 fingers, and felt the weak exhale. What she did not know, what she could not have known, was that the Alpha King had been in this state by choice. A border dispute with the Thornfall Pack had gone wrong. Kyle had crossed into neutral territory alone to track a rogue who had been killing livestock on Blackridge's southern farms. The rogue had surprised him, 3 against 1. Kyle had won, but barely, and the effort of holding his shift for 6 days straight while injured had left him genuinely weakened. He had meant to drag himself to the patrol route, wait for his scouts. Instead, he had smelled lavender and something warmer underneath it, something like sun-heated cotton, and his wolf had followed that scent to the rain barrel and collapsed. Now, inside the wolf's mind, Kyle felt her hands on his fur. Small hands, gentle. She was talking in a low, continuous murmur, the way people talk to frightened animals, a stream of nonsense and reassurance. Easy, sweetheart. You are all right. I have got you. Let me see this paw. His wolf preened. His human mind said, I should shift, reveal myself. This is beneath my station. His wolf said absolutely nothing, because it was already being carried. Somehow, this woman was somehow half dragging a wolf that weighed more than she did across her threshold, her boots slipping on the wet flagstone, her breath coming in sharp little grunts of effort. She deposited him on a wool blanket beside her wood stove. The fire was already banked low, but she fed it until the flames licked orange and gold across the ceiling beams. Then she went for water a basin, strips of clean linen that smelled of cedar from her storage chest. She cleaned the gash along his ribs. Her fingers were precise and unhurried, the touch of someone accustomed to handling delicate things. Seeds the size of dust motes, centuries-old specimens, sealed in glass. She treated his wound with the same reverence. Kael, for the first time in 9 years of rule, felt no compulsion to be anywhere else. "I will shift in the morning," he told himself, "when I am strong enough." She need not know. In the morning, she fed him bone broth from a chipped blue bowl. She sat cross-legged on the floor beside him, eating toast with honey. And she told him about her day's work, about the seed vault, about a particular strain of winter wheat that had been lost in the southern blight, and which she had found mislabeled in a drawer no one had opened in 40 years. She was not performing kindness for an audience. There was no audience. There was only her, and a wolf she believed was feral, and the quiet morning sounds of a kettle cooling and a fire settling. Kael stayed. He told himself reasons. His paw needed time to heal. The rogue situation required intelligence gathering near the border. He could not shift while this weakened without risking exposure. Every reason was a lie, and his wolf knew it. By the 3rd day, she had named him. She called him Bramble because of the burrs she had spent an hour combing from his coat. She spoke to him constantly, the way lonely people speak to animals, with a freedom they cannot afford around other humans. On the 4th night, she ran a bath. Not for herself, for him. She filled the old copper tub in her washroom with warm water, poured in something that smelled of oatmeal and chamomile, and then she looked at the wolf standing in her hallway and said, "Come on then. You smell like a compost heap, and I will not have it." The Alpha King of Black Ridge, conqueror of the Eastern Ridge War, negotiator of the Thornfall Accord, stood in a copper bathtub while a 5'4" Omega scrubbed behind his ears with a washcloth. His wolf was in paradise. His human mind was in crisis. She hummed while she worked. An old song, something without words. Her fingers worked through the tangles in his coat, careful around the healing wound, firm everywhere else. Water sloshed over the tub's edge and darkened the floorboards. She did not seem to care. When she was finished, she toweled him off with a blanket that had clearly been her own, because it smelled overwhelmingly of her. Lavender and warm skin, and that sun-cotton scent that made his wolf want to roll in it. "You are actually quite handsome under all that mess," she said, tilting her head. She touched the white streak that ran from his left ear to his jaw. The marking that every wolf in Blackridge knew belonged to their king. She did not know. He should have left that night. He was healed enough to shift, to walk out in his human form, to send a runner for his guard. Instead, when she settled into bed with her knitting needles clicking in the lamplight, the wolf that was Kyle Ashbourne lay down on the rug beside her bed and listened to the rhythm of yarn sliding through her fingers until he fell asleep. This was how the sweater happened. On the 7th day, she measured him. She thought he was sleeping, and perhaps his wolf had been, because Kyle surfaced to the sensation of a soft measuring tape being draped around his chest, while Elara muttered numbers to herself. 32 inches. No, 34 you have filled out. Hold still, Bramble. He held still. Over the next week, he watched the sweater take shape. She worked on it in the evenings after her shift, her needles clicking in that meditative rhythm, the blue yarn growing row by row into something small and shapeless that gradually became recognizable. She made mistakes, pulled rows out, restarted the sleeves twice. He watched her frown at a pattern book. Look at him. Look at the book again. It was the most absurd thing anyone had ever done for him. When she finally slipped it over his head, tugging his paws through the armholes one at a time, while he stood patient and ridiculous in her kitchen. She stepped back and clapped her hands together. "Oh," she breathed. "Oh, you look so handsome." The sweater was tight. It was uneven. One sleeve was slightly longer than the other. The neckline sat crooked. His wolf had never been prouder of anything. "This is undignified," said his human mind. His wolf said nothing. His wolf was already strutting toward the window to admire his reflection. That was the morning Roman found him. Roman, his beta, his lifelong second, the only wolf alive permitted to laugh at the Alpha King, stood in the tree line with his hand over his mouth and his shoulders shaking. Behind him, 3 members of the royal guard stared with expressions that suggested they were memorizing this moment for future leverage. Kael shifted behind Elara's woodshed while she was at work, pulled on the emergency clothes Roman had brought, and met his beta's gaze with the full weight of royal authority. "Not one word." Roman's voice was strangled. "Of course not, my king. Though I should mention the sweater is still—" He gestured vaguely at Kael's chest. Kael looked down. Somehow, in the shift, a strand of blue yarn had tangled around his wrist. He stared at it. "I am going back tonight," he said. Roman's eyebrows climbed towards his hairline. "With respect, Your Majesty, you have been missing for 2 weeks. The council is convening. Lady Serena has been telling anyone who will listen that you have been killed and she should be installed as interim." The mention of Serena, his late mother's chosen candidate for his mate, sent a cold blade through Kael's chest. Serena, with her political teeth and her careful cruelty, who had once told Kael at a banquet that Omegas without pack connections were barely wolves at all. "I will address the council tomorrow," Kael said. "Tonight I am going back." Roman opened his mouth, closed it, nodded once, and so began the double life. By day, Kael resumed his duties at the Black Ridge Keep. He held court. He signed treaties. He endured Serena's proximity at council meetings, where she sat at his left as tradition dictated, her perfume aggressive and botanical, nothing like lavender. By night, Bramble returned to the stone cottage. The first time he came back, Elara opened her door and dropped to her knees on the threshold, pressing her face into his neck with a force that surprised them both. "I thought you had left," she whispered. 3 days, Bramble. I thought something had gotten you." Guilt hit him like a physical blow. He pressed his nose against her shoulder, breathing her in, and his wolf made a sound low in its chest that was pure apology. After that, he never missed a night. The escalation was gradual and devastating. Week 1, he slept on the rug. Week 2, she patted the foot of the bed and said, "Oh, come on. The floor is cold." By week 3, he was curled against her back while she slept, her hand buried in the fur at his neck, her breathing slow and even and trusting in a way that made something ache behind his ribs. She talked to him, really talked, about the archive, about the seeds she was cataloguing, about a particular specimen of ghost orchid pollen she had discovered mislabeled as common ryegrass. She talked about her life before Black Ridge, growing up in the Hollow Mere Pack, where her mother had been a low-ranking Omega who died in the same flu season that took half the pack's elderly. She talked about being transferred to Black Ridge at 16, a political courtesy that no one had followed up on, leaving her essentially parentless in a pack that did not remember inviting her. She talked about being lonely, not in those words. She never said, "I am lonely." But she said things like, "I have been saving this story for you, Bramble. I did not have anyone else to tell." And she said, "You are the first warm thing in this house besides the stove." And once, half asleep with her fingers wound into his fur, she said, "I think you might be my best friend, which is embarrassing because you are a wolf, but I do not think you judge me for it." He did not judge her. He was falling in love with her. This was a problem for several reasons, the most immediate being that during the day they had met. Twice. The first time was accidental. She had been called to the keep to present her quarterly inventory report to the council, and Kael, who had not known she would be there, had walked into the archive chamber and seen her standing before his council table in a worn linen dress, her dark hair pulled back with a leather cord, her hands steady, despite the fact that 6 alphas and 2 betas were staring at her with varying degrees of boredom and disdain. She had looked up at him, the Alpha King in his human form. Tall, dark-haired, the white streak at his temple that mirrored the wolf's marking. She had looked at him without recognition, without any flicker of connection, and she had said, "Your Majesty," with a small bow, and returned to her report. His wolf had howled. The second time was worse. He had gone to the archive itself, inventing a reason, something about verifying the heritage grain stores for the winter trade agreement. She had led him through the vault, her voice professional and quiet, explaining the organization system she had built over 6 years alone in the cold. Their hands had brushed when she passed him a specimen jar, and she had flinched back as if burned, her cheeks flushing pink. "Forgive me, Your Majesty," she had said. He had wanted to say, "You scrubbed behind my ears 4 days ago. You sang to me. You told me about your mother." Instead, he had said, "No harm done," in a voice so stiff it could have been carved from ice. She had not looked at him again. That night, Bramble had pushed through her cottage door with unusual force, pressing his body against her legs until she laughed and knelt to cup his face in her hands. "What is it tonight?" she asked. "You are clingy." He could not tell her that he was atoning, that his human self was cold and formal, because he was terrified of what would happen if he was not. That the Alpha King could not kneel before an Omega archivist and press his face into her hands the way his wolf could. So he did what his wolf did best. He stayed close. He was warm. He was present. The stealing began in the 3rd week. First, a sock. She had left laundry on the drying rack beside the stove, and his wolf, operating on pure instinct, had nosed a single wool sock from the line and carried it under the bed. Elara found it the next morning and blamed the draft from the window. Then her scarf, the green one that smelled most strongly of her, that she wrapped around her throat on vault days. She searched for it for an hour before giving up and wearing an older one. The scarf was in Kael's chambers at the keep, tucked beneath his pillow. He was not proud of this. He was also not stopping. Then the incidents became reciprocal. Bramble started bringing things. A perfect quartz stone from the river. A clutch of late autumn wildflowers, stems slightly crushed from being carried in wolf jaws. Once a rabbit, freshly killed, deposited on her doorstep with evident pride. She had looked at the rabbit, looked at Bramble, back at the rabbit. "I appreciate the thought," she said carefully, "but I have a stew already going. Maybe next time." His wolf's tail had drooped. The next morning, the rabbit was gone, and a pot of rabbit stew sat cooling on her stove. She had cooked it. For him. Even though she had not needed it. Something in his chest went tight and never fully loosened. The near exposure came on a Tuesday. Roman had tracked him to the cottage. Not to retrieve him, simply to report. Kael was behind the woodshed, mid-shift, fur receding into skin, when Elara's back door opened. He flattened himself against the shed wall, naked and breathing hard, while she called into the darkness. "Bramble? Was that you?" He held perfectly still. Roman, 10 yards away in the trees, held equally still. She shrugged, went back inside. The door closed. Roman materialized from the underbrush, holding out a pair of trousers with the expression of a man who had seen everything and judged all of it. "You realize," Roman said quietly, "this is insane." Kale took the trousers. "Yes, you are the Alpha King of Black Ridge, and you are sleeping in an Omega's bed as a dog. Wolf." The distinction does not help Kale. Kyle pulled the trousers on, ran a hand through his hair. The white streak caught the moonlight. "She is my mate," he said. The words came out before he could stop them, before he had even fully thought them. But the moment they hit the air, he knew they were true. Had been true since the rain barrel, since the measuring tape, since the first night she said his fake name in her sleep. Roman went very still. Then, slowly, he said, "Does she know?" "No." "Does she know you are the wolf?" "No." "Does she know anything at all?" "She knows I like having my ears scratched," Kyle said flatly. "She knows I prefer broth to kibble. She knows I will not eat carrots." Roman pressed both hands over his face. The night everything shifted, Elara was sitting on her bed with Bramble's head in her lap. She was not knitting tonight. Her hands were still, resting on his fur, and she was looking at the ceiling. "Something happened today," she said. Kale's ears pricked forward. The Alpha King came to the archive again. She paused. "He asked about the ghost orchid specimens, the ones I told you about." Kale's stomach dropped. "How would he know about those?" She continued, her voice distant. "I have not submitted that report yet. I have not told anyone except—" She looked down at the wolf in her lap. "Except you," she laughed, a small, self-conscious sound. "I am being ridiculous. Wolves do not relay information to kings." She scratched beneath his jaw. "He probably read a memo. Someone else in the department must know." His heart was hammering so hard he was certain she could feel it through his rib cage. She let it go. But something had shifted in her expression, a hairline crack in the absolute trust she had placed in the fiction of Bramble. He should have told her then. He knew that later with the perfect clarity of hindsight. But that same night, she said the thing that broke him open. "I think," she whispered into the dark, her voice so quiet it was barely more than breath. "I think I might be in love with the Alpha King." Every muscle in his wolf form went rigid. "Which is stupid," she continued, her fingers tightening in his fur. "Because he does not know I exist. I mean, he has been to the archive twice, and both times he looked at me like I was a piece of furniture." She paused. Not unkind, just absent, like I did not register. The guilt was a living thing inside him, with teeth. "But when he walked in," she said, and her voice went softer still, "I could not breathe, Bramble. My whole body I do not know how to describe it. Like every cell was pointing at him, like gravity shifted." She pressed her face into the top of his head. "I think it might be the mate bond. I think he might be. But that is impossible, right? Because if he felt it too, he would have said something. He would have acknowledged me. Even once." Kyle closed his eyes. The weight of every cold, formal interaction sat on his chest like stone. "I think the bond is one-sided," she whispered. "I think he does not feel it. And I think I will never be anything more than the woman who keeps his seed vault organized." She was crying, quietly, the way people cry when they have had a long time to practice doing it alone. The tears dropped onto his fur, warm and devastating. His wolf keened, a low, anguished sound that made her startle, then pull him closer. "Oh, Bramble, I am sorry. I am making you sad." She wiped her face with the back of her hand. "Forget it. It does not matter. I have you, right? That is enough." It was not enough. He knew that. She knew that. And tomorrow, he would fix it. Except tomorrow brought Lord Callum Vex. Callum was the second son of the Thornfall Alpha, sent as a diplomatic envoy to finalize the border agreement. He was tall, golden-haired, and possessed of the easy charm that came from never having been denied anything. He arrived at Blackridge with a retinue of 12 and a smile that showed too many teeth. He also, within 6 hours of arrival, found the Seed Archive, found Elara. Kael was in a council session when Roman leaned close and murmured, "The Thornfall envoy is in the vault, with your archivist. He has been there 40 minutes. The pen in Kael's hand snapped in half. He excused himself with a brevity that made 3 council members exchange glances. He walked to the archive entrance, down the stone steps, through the temperature-locked doors, and found Callum leaning against a specimen cabinet, while Elara showed him a tray of seeds with the quiet enthusiasm she usually reserved for Bramble. Callum was smiling at her, not at the seeds, at her. "Your Majesty," Elara said, straightening. "Lord Callum was interested in our heritage grain collection. The Thornfall territory lost several strains in the southern blight, and he wondered if we might—" "I am aware of what was lost," Kael said. His voice came out lower than intended. Colder. Callum turned, and something knowing flickered across his face. "Alpha King," Callum said, bowing precisely the correct degree. "What a remarkable resource you have here." He glanced at Elara. "And a remarkable curator." Elara looked between them. A slight crease appeared between her brows. "If you will excuse us, Lord Callum," Kael said, "I need to speak with my archivist about a cataloguing matter." Callum's smile did not waver. "Of course, Your Majesty." He turned to Elara. "Perhaps you might continue showing me the collection another time, Miss Voss." Elara nodded politely. Callum left. The temperature-controlled air settled between Kael and Elara like a wall. "Your Majesty," she said. What cataloguing matter? He had nothing. He had come down here with no plan except the overwhelming directive to remove Callum from her proximity. "The ghost orchid specimens," he said, grasping. "I want a full report on provenance." She blinked. Of course. Though I am curious how you knew about them. I have not filed anything yet." The crack again. "Wider this time." She was looking at him with an expression that was not suspicious, exactly, but alert. Like a piece of a puzzle had floated into her peripheral vision, and she could not quite bring it into focus. He left before she could ask another question. That night, Bramble arrived at the cottage and found Elara sitting on the front step despite the cold, her arms wrapped around her knees, looking at the sky. "He acted so strangely," she told the wolf, pulling him close so she could lean against his warm side. "The Alpha King. He appeared out of nowhere and basically chased Lord Callum out of my archive." She paused, and then he asked about the ghost orchids again, which he should not know about. Bramble pressed closer. She rested her head on his shoulder. "And Lord Callum," she continued, "he was nice. He actually listened when I talked about the seeds. He asked questions. He looked at me like I was a person." She exhaled. "Unlike the king, who looks at me like I is something to be solved, and then filed away." The growl came from Bramble's chest before Kael could stop it. Low, possessive. A sound that belonged to an alpha staking a claim, not a pet wolf being jealous of dinner-table conversation. Elara sat up, looked at him. "Bramble?" The wolf forced his hackles down, licked her hand, apologetic. She laughed uneasily. "If I did not know better, I would think you were jealous." She cupped his face. "You are a very possessive wolf. You know that." She pressed her forehead to his. "Good thing you are not a man. I would have to have a very awkward conversation about boundaries." If Kael could have combusted from irony, there would have been nothing left but the blue sweater. The next 3 days were torture. Callum sought Alara out twice more. Once at the archive, once at the keep's kitchen garden, where she grew supplemental herbs for her work. Both times Kael was informed by Roman, who had taken to delivering these updates with the careful neutrality of a man trying very hard not to say, "I told you so." On the 3rd day, Callum brought her a book, a rare botanical text on orchid propagation, bound in leather, clearly expensive. He presented it to her in the archive, and Alara's face lit up with a pleasure so genuine and unguarded that Kael, watching from the corridor through the cracked door, felt his canines extend involuntarily. That night, Bramble knocked the book off her nightstand with his nose. Twice. "Bramble," she scolded, picking it up. "Stop that! It is a gift from a friend." The 3rd time he knocked it off, she put it in a drawer and gave him a look that was equal parts exasperation and amusement. "You are ridiculous," she said. He was ridiculous. He knew he was ridiculous. The Alpha King of Blackridge was engaging in a territorial dispute with a book. The breaking point came at the winter equinox reception. It was the first formal event Alara had attended in 6 years of working at Blackridge. She was only there because the archive had produced a significant find, a complete seed collection from the pre-Blight era, and the council wanted it presented to the assembled dignitaries. She stood at the edge of the great hall in a dress that Kael had never seen, dark green, simple, clearly her best and clearly old. Her hair was down, dark waves over her shoulders. She held a single specimen jar in her hands like a talisman. Callum found her before Kael could move. The Thornfall envoy crossed the hall with easy confidence, took her hand, said something that made her smile. He leaned close. His fingers brushed her elbow. From across the hall, Serena appeared at Kael's side. "She is pretty enough," Serena observed, watching the same scene. "In a provincial way. Though I cannot imagine what the Thornfall heir sees in a vault keeper." She glanced at Kael. "Can you?" Kael said nothing. His jaw was locked so tight his teeth ached. Serena studied him for a moment. Then something shifted in her expression. A calculation. A decision. "Of course," she said lightly, turning away. "You would hardly notice. She is not exactly lunar material, is she?" She walked away. And for one breath, before she was swallowed by the crowd, Kael saw her shoulders drop. Just slightly. The posture of someone who had already lost something and was trying to pretend the losing did not sting. Serena had pursued him for 3 years. Not out of love, he knew that. Out of ambition, out of her mother's dying wish, out of the particular hunger of a woman raised to believe her worth was measured in the rank of her mate. But in that single slump of her shoulders, Kael saw something that might have been exhaustion, the weariness of performing certainty when there was none. Then Callum's hand moved to the small of Alara's back, and everything else disappeared. Kael crossed the hall. The crowd parted for him without conscious thought, bodies responding to the dominance that rolled off him in waves, thick and suffocating. Conversations died in his wake. Glasses paused halfway to lips. Callum saw him coming, had the good sense to step back. "Miss Voss," Kael said. His voice was controlled. "Barely." "Your Majesty?" Alara's eyes were wide. "Is everything all right?" "Dance with me." It was not a request. She knew it. He knew it. Everyone within earshot knew it. She set the specimen jar on the nearest table, placed her hand in his, and let herself be drawn onto the floor. He had never danced with her before, had never touched her in his human form, except by accident. But his wolf knew her body, knew the exact curve of her waist, the particular weight of her leaning against him, and his hands found her with a certainty that had nothing to do with choreography. She felt it too. He could see it in the way her breath caught, in the way her fingers tightened on his shoulder, in the flush that crept up her throat. They did not speak. The music was something old and slow, strings that wound like smoke through the vaulted hall. She fit against him the way she fit against his wolf, and the mate bond sang between them like a wire pulled taut. When the song ended, she stepped back. Her eyes were bright and confused and afraid. "I do not understand," she whispered. You never. He released her. It took every ounce of control he possessed. "Go home," he said. His voice was rough. "I will explain. Soon." She left the hall without looking back. Callum watched her go, then turned to Kyle with an expression that mixed admiration and resignation. "I assume," the envoy said quietly, "she is spoken for." Kyle looked at him. The gold of his alpha eyes bled through, unmistakable and absolute. "She has always been spoken for." Callum raised both hands, palms out, and stepped back. He was smiling, but it was rueful now, the smile of a man who knows when to fold. "Understood, Your Majesty." Clearly. Kyle went after her. He shifted in the tree line outside the keep, faster than he had in years, the wolf bursting forth with a single-mindedness that left no room for thought. He ran. Through the birch forest, up the goat trail, his paws hitting the frozen ground in a rhythm that matched his heartbeat. He reached the cottage before her. She found Bramble on her doorstep, panting, the blue sweater still somehow stretched across his massive chest because he had never taken it off, had been wearing it beneath his shift this entire time, the magic folding it into his fur and releasing it back each time he changed. She dropped to her knees. Her hands came up to his face. "Bramble." Something happened tonight. She was breathless from the walk, her cheeks red from cold and emotion. "The king. He danced with me. He looked at me like—" She swallowed. "Like you look at me. Exactly like you look at me." The wolf went still, her hands slowed on his fur. Her eyes moved to the white streak on his jaw, moved up to where it started at his ear. She was thinking. He could see the pieces assembling behind her eyes, the months of coincidences finally forming a shape she could not ignore. "The ghost orchids," she said softly. "I told no one about the ghost orchids except you." His tail was motionless, and the night he came to the archive, you did not come home that evening. You were an hour late. I thought you had gotten lost. Her breathing had gone shallow. "And the sweater." She touched the blue yarn stretched across his chest. "I measured you at 34 inches. The Alpha King, tonight, when we danced." She pressed her hand flat against the wolf's ribcage. Her palm spanned the same width she had measured with her tape. "Bramble," she whispered. "Who are you?" He shifted. It was not elegant. It was not planned. One moment there was a wolf in a tiny blue sweater, and the next there was a man, kneeling on her doorstep in the moonlight. The sweater now stretched impossibly across shoulders that were far too broad for it, the yarn straining at every seam. He was still wearing it, the sweater she had knit for a feral wolf. It covered approximately a third of his torso. Elara stared. Kyle said, "I can explain." She hit him, not a slap, a punch, square in the shoulder, hard enough that he rocked back on his heels. 3 months, she said. Her voice was shaking. 3 months, you have been sleeping in my bed. I bathed you. I told you things I have never told another living soul. I cried on you about being in love with you while you were right there. I know. You stole my sock. Yes. You knocked Callum's book off my nightstand 3 times. He deserved it. He is a diplomat, she said, her voice rising. You risked an international incident over a botany book. Kyle said nothing, because she was not wrong. She stood up, paced. Her hands were fisted at her sides, and her scent had gone sharp with anger, the lavender burning off to reveal something thorned and wild underneath. "You let me think the bond was one-sided," she said. She turned on him. "You let me believe you did not feel it. I mourned that. I grieved a living man's indifference. And you were right here the whole time, with your head in my lap, listening." "Yes," Kael said. He stayed on his knees. He owed her that. "Why?" "Because I was afraid," he said. And it was the truth, stripped bare, simpler than any royal declaration. "Because, as the wolf, you wanted me. As the man, I was not certain you would." She stared at him. The anger did not leave her face, but something else moved alongside it. Recognition, maybe. An understanding of what it meant to be wanted for one shape and feared in another. "The sweater is very tight," she said finally. He looked down at himself. Blue yarn stretched to its absolute limit across his chest, the sleeves cutting off circulation somewhere around his biceps. He looked absurd. He knew he looked absurd. "I can take it off," he said. "Do not you dare." She stood over him for a long moment. The moonlight was silver on her hair, and the anger was ebbing, replaced by something more complicated. Something that looked like the beginning of forgiveness, but was not there yet. "You are going to court me," she said. "Properly. As a man. You are going to come to my door and knock like a person, and have conversations where I know who I am talking to. And you are going to bring me flowers with your hands, not your mouth. Done. And you are not sleeping in my bed for at least a month." His wolf howled internally. "Done," he said. She reached down, touched the white streak at his temple, the same one she had traced 1,000 times on his wolf form. Her fingers were gentle, despite the steel in her voice. "I fell in love with a wolf," she said. "And then I fell in love with a king. And apparently they are the same insufferable creature." He caught her hand, pressed his mouth to her palm, felt her pulse leap against his lips. "I was never going to leave that first night," he said against her skin. "You should know that. From the moment you said, 'Easy, sweetheart,' I was finished." She pulled her hand back, but she was almost smiling. "1 month," she said, "minimum." It lasted 11 days. Not because he pushed, because on the 11th night, she opened her door and found not the wolf, but the man, standing in the cold with a jar of ghost orchid seeds he had hand-carried from a collector in the Southern Territories. A gift that said, "I listened. I remembered. I know who you are." She pulled him inside by the front of his shirt. The morning after, Kael stood before the full council of Blackridge with Elara at his side. She wore the green dress because it was still her best, and she held her spine straight despite the weight of every gaze in the room. Serena was in her usual seat at the council table. Her face was perfectly composed, but her hands were clasped in her lap so tightly the knuckles had gone white. "This woman is my fated mate," Kael said to the assembled room. His voice carried the finality of a door closing. "She is Elara Voss, keeper of the Blackridge Seed Archive, and she will be your Luna." Silence, then murmuring. Then Serena stood. The room tensed. Serena looked at Elara for a long moment. Her face was unreadable. Then she turned to Kael, and something exhausted and almost peaceful settled over her features. "I withdraw my candidacy," she said simply, "and I request reassignment to the Eastern Diplomatic Corps." She did not sneer. She did not rage. She simply folded her ambition into a neat square and carried it out of the room with the same composure she carried everything. Roman let out a breath he had apparently been holding for 3 years. Later, when the hall had emptied, Elara turned to Kael. Her expression was caught between disbelief and something brighter. "That was terrifying," she said. He pulled her close. pressed his face into her hair, into the lavender and sun cotton that his wolf had followed home on a rainy night 3 months ago. You catalogued the genetic heritage of 7 extinct crop species alone in a cold vault for 6 years, he murmured. Nothing in this keep should frighten you. She laughed against his chest. That evening, in the stone cottage at the edge of pack territory, the alpha king of Black Ridge lay with his head in his mate's lap while she knitted. Her needles clicked in that meditative rhythm he had memorized months ago. The fire settled. The kettle cooled. She was making a new sweater. Bigger this time. Dark grey wool, properly measured. He was in human form. He was wearing the blue one anyway, stretched to absurdity. The yarn holding on through what could only be described as stubbornness. She had tried to take it back, to unravel it and reuse the yarn. He had refused with a vehemence that startled them both. "It is falling apart," she said, not looking up from her needles. "I do not care. The sleeves are cutting off your circulation. I have survived worse." She looked down at him, his head in her lap, the white streak at his temple, the ridiculous blue sweater. Her eyes were soft. "You are still the most spoiled wolf I have ever met," she said. He closed his eyes. Her fingers found his hair, threading through it the way they had threaded through his fur on 100 quiet nights. The needles resumed their clicking. The fire popped. Outside, snow was beginning to fall on the birch forest, settling white and silent on the goat trail, on the woodshed, on the rain barrel where a king had once collapsed and found the only thing worth more than a crown. Her fingers in his hair. The soft pull of yarn through wool. The warmth of a home that smelled like lavender and cedar and something that belonged only to them. The sweater held,